They're watching you. The billionaire ignored everyone in the airport, except the poor little girl who saved his life. The airport hummed with its usual indifference, a carefully choreographed chaos of rolling suitcases, clipped announcements, and people who had learned not to look at one another for too long. Daniel Crawford moved through the VIP terminal with the ease of a man accustomed to space opening in front of him. His dark hair was perfectly in place, his blue eyes alert but distant, scanning reflections in glass walls more out of habit than concern. Years of wealth and power had taught him that danger rarely announced itself loudly, it hid behind smiles, contracts, and silence. He adjusted the cuff of his blue suit as he walked, already thinking about the meeting waiting for him on the other side of the flight. The jet was fueled, security cleared, the schedule precise. Everything was under control, just as it always was. That was when a voice, small and fragile yet impossibly clear, cut through the background noise. They're watching you. Daniel stopped so abruptly that one of his assistants nearly walked into him. He turned, irritation already forming, ready to dismiss whoever had spoken, when he saw her. A little girl stood a few steps away, thin shoulders wrapped in a faded orange dress that looked too light for the chilled air of the terminal. Her blonde hair was messy, as if no one had bothered to smooth it, and her shoes were scuffed from long use. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. What unsettled him wasn't her appearance. It was her eyes. They were fixed on him with a seriousness that didn't belong to a child, steady and unblinking, as if she were seeing something he wasn't. "Excuse me," Daniel said, lowering his voice despite himself. She stepped closer, careful, deliberate, as though she understood the importance of not drawing attention. "They're watching you," she repeated, quieter now. "They've been following you since security." Daniel followed her gaze without turning his head. 2 men stood near a coffee stand a short distance away, both in black suits, both pretending to be absorbed in their phones. There was nothing remarkable about them at first glance, yet something about the way they stood, too still, too aware, made Daniel's instincts stir. "Who sent you?" he asked, already preparing to signal security. "No one," the girl replied. "I just saw them." "Why tell me?" he pressed. Her fingers curled nervously at the hem of her dress, but her voice didn't shake. "Because they're waiting for you to be alone." Daniel felt a cold thread slide down his spine. He had ignored warnings before, written them off as paranoia or manipulation, but this was different. There was no agenda in her eyes, no attempt to gain anything. Only urgency. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily," she said. "And you shouldn't get on that plane." Before he could respond, a sharp noise cracked through the terminal, not a gunshot but close enough to send a ripple of panic through the crowd. People shouted, security moved, and one of the men in black shifted suddenly, his hand disappearing beneath his jacket. Daniel reacted without thinking. He grabbed Lily's arm and pulled her down behind a service counter as alarms began to blare. His heart pounded as shouts echoed around them and heavy footsteps thundered past. Within moments, armed security surrounded the 2 men, forcing them to the ground. Weapons were pulled from their bags, confirmation arriving too fast, too real. Daniel stayed crouched, one arm instinctively shielding Lily as chaos unfolded above them. She was trembling now, but she hadn't screamed. She simply clutched the edge of his jacket, her face pale but determined. When it was over and the terminal slowly returned to a shaken order, Daniel looked down at the girl who had just altered the course of his life without even knowing it. In that moment, surrounded by flashing lights and hurried voices, one truth settled heavily in his chest. Whatever this child had seen, whatever she had sensed, she had stepped into his path for a reason. The aftermath moved quickly, yet time seemed distorted, stretching and compressing in unpredictable ways. Daniel barely registered being escorted through a secure corridor, past glass doors and guarded checkpoints, his attention fixed entirely on the small hand still gripping the sleeve of his jacket. Lily walked beside him without protest, her steps light but purposeful, as if she had already accepted that her warning had changed everything and there was no turning back. They were taken into a quiet security office tucked away from the terminal's noise. The walls were plain, the lighting too bright, the air thick with the sterile scent of cleaning agents. Lily was offered a chair, her feet dangling well above the floor, while Daniel remained standing, his body still humming with adrenaline. Through the glass wall, he could see officers moving briskly, voices low but urgent, their expressions tight with controlled tension. "Are you hurt?" Daniel asked softly, finally releasing the breath he had been holding. Lily shook her head. No. Her composure unsettled him. Children cried after moments like this. They shook. They clung. Lily simply watched, absorbing everything with a calm that bordered on unsettling wisdom. A security officer entered and asked her name, her age, where she was traveling from, where she was supposed to be going. Lily answered each question simply, without embellishment. "I don't have a ticket," she said. "I stay where I can." Daniel felt a tightness in his chest at those words. He had spoken to heads of state, to executives who trembled behind polished smiles, yet this quiet statement carried more weight than any threat he had faced. He watched the officer's expression change, concern replacing procedure. "And your parents?" the officer asked gently. Lily's gaze drifted to the floor. "They're gone." The officer paused, then nodded, leaving the room with a promise to return. Silence settled again, heavier now. Daniel took the chair across from her, lowering himself to her level for the first time since meeting her. "You saved my life," he said quietly. Lily looked up at him, her blue eyes steady. "You were going to die." The bluntness of the statement sent a chill through him. "How did you know?" he asked. She hesitated, then shrugged slightly. "I notice things. People who watch without blinking. People who don't belong." Daniel studied her, trying to reconcile her small frame with the clarity of her perception. "You could have walked away," he said. "You didn't have to say anything." "I know," Lily replied. "But I didn't want to." Her answer was simple, yet it carried a depth that made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't explain. For the first time, he wondered not just how she had seen the danger, but how long she had been learning to read the world like that. A different officer entered, his tone respectful but serious, explaining that the two men had been carrying concealed weapons and false identification. The implication hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. This had not been a coincidence. This had been planned. Daniel nodded, his jaw tightening as reality settled in. When the officer left again, he turned back to Lily. "What were you doing in the airport alone?" he asked. "I like watching planes," she said quietly. "They leave." The word lingered between them, simple yet loaded. Daniel understood it instinctively. Leaving was a luxury. Staying was sometimes a necessity imposed by circumstances beyond control. He stood slowly, making a decision before fully realizing it. "You're not going back out there alone," he said. Lily looked at him, studying his face the same way she had studied the men in black. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Yes," he answered without hesitation. She nodded once, accepting the answer as if it were inevitable. Outside the room, the airport continued its restless movement, unaware that a child with nothing but instinct and courage had just altered the fate of one of the most powerful men in the building. And as Daniel watched Lily swing her legs from the chair, waiting patiently for whatever came next, he understood that the danger he had escaped was only the beginning. Something far more significant had just entered his life. Hours later, the airport felt like a different place, stripped of its earlier urgency and replaced by a subdued, watchful calm. Daniel sat in a private lounge reserved for emergencies, the kind designed to keep powerful people out of sight when the world became inconvenient. A cup of untouched coffee had gone cold on the table beside him, forgotten as his attention remained fixed on Lily. She sat curled into one corner of the sofa, her small hands folded in her lap, quietly observing everything around her as if memorizing it for later. Security teams moved in and out of the room, their conversations low and clipped, their glances occasionally flicking toward the girl with a mix of curiosity and unease. Daniel had answered countless questions already, signed preliminary reports, authorized investigations, yet none of it felt as urgent as the one question that kept circling his mind. Who was Lily, really, and how had she learned to see danger so clearly when others had missed it entirely? When the last officer finally left them alone, the silence grew heavier. Daniel shifted closer, careful not to crowd her. He had negotiated hostile takeovers and dismantled corporate empires without a tremor in his voice, yet speaking to this child felt infinitely more delicate. "You didn't just guess," he said gently. "What you did back there wasn't luck." Lily glanced at him, then away again, her gaze drifting to the large window overlooking the runway. Planes moved slowly in the distance, their lights blinking like distant stars. "People think danger is loud," she said quietly. "But it's usually quiet. It watches first." Daniel felt a chill move through him. "How do you know that?" She hesitated, then shrugged in a way that felt practiced. "You learn when you don't have anyone to protect you." The word struck deeper than he expected. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, allowing the weight of her honesty to settle. "How long have you been on your own?" he asked. "Long enough," Lily replied. There was no self-pity in her voice, only fact. "I stay where no one asks too many questions. Airports are good for that. Everyone's leaving somewhere, so no one notices who isn't." Daniel's chest tightened. The idea that a child had learned to survive by blending into crowds of strangers unsettled him more than the attempted assassination ever could. He wondered how many times she had seen things she shouldn't have, how often she had chosen silence over safety simply because no one would listen. "Why me?" he asked finally. "Out of everyone in that terminal." Lily turned to him fully now, studying his face with the same intensity that had stopped him in his tracks earlier. "Because you looked tired," she said. "Not angry tired. Lonely tired." The observation caught him off guard. He had spent years perfecting the image of an untouchable man, immune to doubt and exhaustion, yet she had seen straight through it in seconds. He looked away, momentarily unsure how to respond. "I didn't want you to die," she added softly. "It would have been wrong." Daniel nodded slowly. He realized then that Lily wasn't motivated by fear or reward, but by an internal compass that refused to ignore what felt unjust. That realization humbled him in a way few things ever had. A member of his security detail returned briefly, informing him that alternative transportation had been arranged and that the investigation was expanding rapidly. Daniel listened, gave instructions, and dismissed him again. When the door closed, he turned back to Lily. "You can come with me," he said. "At least until we figure out what happens next." She didn't react immediately, her eyes narrowing slightly as she weighed the offer. "You don't know me," she said. "And I don't belong in your world." "Maybe not," Daniel replied honestly. "But you belong somewhere safe. And I can give you that." The word safe lingered between them, fragile and tempting. Lily hugged her knees closer to her chest, thinking. Daniel didn't rush her. For once in his life, he allowed silence to do the work. "What if I leave later?" she asked quietly. "Then I won't stop you," he said. "But you won't leave hungry or afraid." She considered this, then gave a small nod. "Okay." The simplicity of her acceptance made his throat tighten. He stood, offering his hand without expectation. After a brief pause, she took it. Her grip was light but steady, as though she had already decided to trust him just enough. As they walked out together, past secured corridors and watchful guards, Daniel felt a strange shift settle inside him. The danger that had followed him for years no longer felt like the greatest threat he faced. For the first time, he understood that saving his own life had been the smallest part of what Lily had done. She had forced him to see the world differently, and himself along with it. The ride away from the airport was silent, but it wasn't empty. The city slid past the tinted windows of the armored car, lights blurring into long streaks of white and gold as night settled in. Daniel sat opposite Lily, his posture relaxed but alert, his mind still replaying the moment her voice cut through the terminal. Lily pressed her forehead lightly against the glass, watching the world move as if she were trying to remember every detail, every exit, every place where someone could disappear without being missed. They arrived at one of Daniel's private residences on the edge of the city, a place designed for discretion rather than comfort. Security lights flickered on as the car pulled through the gate, illuminating manicured hedges and clean stone paths. Lily looked around with cautious curiosity, her expression unreadable. "This is where you live?" she asked quietly. "One of the places," Daniel replied. "You'll be safe here." The word safe again. It hovered in the air like a promise that had yet to prove itself. Inside, the house was quiet and meticulously ordered, the kind of space that looked untouched even when lived in. Lily stepped in slowly, as if expecting the floor to react beneath her feet. Daniel noticed how she instinctively stayed close to the walls, how her gaze flicked to doorways and corners before moving on. These were not habits learned overnight. A housekeeper appeared briefly, concern flashing across her face when she saw the girl, but Daniel reassured her with a look and a few low words. Lily watched the exchange carefully, cataloging reactions, trust and authority, the unspoken hierarchy of the space. Daniel led her into the kitchen and set out food without ceremony, keeping his movements casual, unthreatening. Lily hesitated only a moment before sitting, her hunger clearly overcoming caution. She ate quietly, methodically, as if unsure when her next meal might come. Daniel didn't comment. He had learned long ago that dignity mattered most when offering help. Afterward, he showed her a guest room, simple but warm, with clean linens and a small lamp casting a soft glow. Lily stood in the doorway, her fingers curling into the fabric of her dress. "You don't have to stay," Daniel said gently. "This isn't a cage." "I know," she replied. "Cages feel different." The answer lingered long after he left her to rest. Daniel returned to his study, where the glow of multiple screens lit the walls. His security team had already begun compiling information, timelines, and internal reports. The attempted attack had not been random. It was surgical. And that frightened him more than chaos ever could. Hours later, when the house had settled into sleep, Daniel found himself unable to rest. He walked quietly down the hall and paused outside Lily's room. The door was slightly open. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her breathing shallow but controlled. "You're not sleeping," he said softly. "Neither are you," she replied without turning her head. He stepped inside and sat in the chair near her bed, careful to keep distance. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how people pretend not to see things," Lily said after a moment. "It's easier that way." Daniel nodded slowly. "It is. Until it isn't." She turned her head then, studying him. "They wanted you gone," she said. "You know that now." "Yes," he answered. "And because of you, they failed." "They'll try again," Lily said calmly. The certainty in her voice wasn't fear-based. It was observational. "I won't let them near you," Daniel said. "Or me." She considered this, then asked quietly, "Why?" The question stopped him. He could have said responsibility, gratitude, obligation. None of those felt true enough. Because someone should have protected you a long time ago, he said instead. And because you protected me when you didn't have to. Lily turned back to the ceiling, absorbing his words. Protection isn't free, she said. It costs something. I can afford the cost, Daniel replied. She was silent for a long time after that. Eventually, her breathing slowed, deepened, slipping into sleep without warning. Daniel stayed where he was until he was sure she was truly resting. As he stood to leave, his phone vibrated with an incoming report. The preliminary findings were troubling. The men in black had connections not just to external rivals, but to someone within his corporate circle. Someone who knew his schedule down to the minute. Daniel looked back at Lily one last time before closing the doors softly behind him. The danger hadn't ended at the airport. It had followed them home. Morning arrived quietly, filtered through tall windows and pale curtains that softened the light before it touched the room. Lily woke before anyone else, as she always did, her senses tuned to change. For a moment she didn't move, listening to the unfamiliar silence, cataloging the sounds of a house that did not creak, shout, or threaten. Somewhere far away, a door closed softly. Footsteps moved with purpose, not aggression. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Daniel was already awake, seated at the long kitchen island with a tablet in front of him and an untouched cup of coffee beside it. The events of the previous night had stripped away any illusion of routine. His security team had worked through the night, uncovering threads that led deeper than he had expected. Names surfaced that he trusted. Timelines aligned too perfectly. The realization that betrayal had come from inside his own circle settled heavily on his shoulders. He noticed Lily standing at the edge of the room before she spoke. She was still wearing the same orange dress, slightly wrinkled now, her bare feet silent against the polished floor. You don't sleep much, she said calmly. Daniel looked up, surprised, then smiled faintly. Neither do you. She shrugged and climbed onto one of the stools, her movements careful but confident. He pushed a plate of food toward her without comment. She accepted it without ceremony and began to eat, slower than the night before, as if testing whether the safety she felt would last. People are upset, Lily said after a moment, nodding toward the tablet. I can tell by your face. Daniel studied her, struck again by how easily she read the unspoken. Some people made choices that put others in danger, he said. That has consequences. Will they be punished? She asked. Yes, he replied without hesitation. They will. She seemed satisfied with that answer, returning her attention to the food. Daniel watched her quietly, noticing small details he had missed before, the way she positioned herself so she could see both entrances, the way her shoulders relaxed slightly as the minutes passed without interruption. These were the behaviors of a child who had learned to survive by anticipating harm, not expecting kindness. Later that day, Daniel insisted she accompany him to a secure office within the house where his legal and security advisors had gathered. Lily sat in a corner with a book someone had thoughtfully provided, pretending to read while absorbing every word spoken around her. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, but when one advisor casually mentioned that the threat might have been exaggerated, Lily's head lifted sharply. He's lying, she said flatly. The room went still. Daniel turned to her. Who? The man who said it was random, she replied. His voice didn't change when he said your name. People always change when they're scared or honest. No one laughed. No one dismissed her. The advisor in question stiffened visibly, color draining from his face. Daniel felt a cold clarity settle over him. Thank you, Daniel said quietly. The meeting ended shortly after, the tone radically altered. Once they were alone again, Daniel knelt in front of Lily, bringing himself eye level with her. You were right again, he said. How do you know these things? She hesitated, then spoke softly. When you grow up watching adults hurt each other, you learn the patterns. I just, listen. The simplicity of the answer made his chest ache. He nodded, accepting it without further probing. That evening, as dusk settled and the house filled with long shadows, Daniel found Lily standing by the window, watching the city lights blink on one by one. She looked smaller in the dim light, younger, the weight she carried briefly visible in the slope of her shoulders. You can send me away if you want, she said without turning around. Now that you're safe. Daniel stepped beside her. I don't feel safe without you here, he admitted. She finally looked at him then, surprise flickering across her face. You're not supposed to need anyone, she said. Neither were you, he replied gently. The truth of it settled between them, quiet and undeniable. For the first time, Lily smiled without restraint, a small, real smile that carried no calculation. That night, as Daniel stood once more outside her room, listening to the steady rhythm of her sleep, he understood something that changed him more deeply than the threat ever had. The danger had exposed cracks in his world, but Lily had revealed something else entirely. A purpose he hadn't known he was missing. The investigation moved faster than Daniel had expected, not because of urgency alone, but because the truth no longer resisted being uncovered. Once the first thread was pulled, the rest followed with frightening ease. Financial transfers that had once blended seamlessly into legitimate accounts now stood out like stains, encrypted messages unraveled under scrutiny, and familiar names began appearing in places they never should have. Daniel spent long hours in his study, listening rather than speaking, letting his team lay the pieces out in full view. Lily remained nearby through most of it, sometimes drawing quietly at the table, sometimes sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, watching the adults with the same alert stillness she had shown in the airport. Daniel noticed that she never placed herself in the center of a room and never sat with her back to a door. These habits were instinctive, ingrained, and they told a story no file ever could. By the third day, the shape of the betrayal was undeniable. The attempt on Daniel's life had not been ordered by an outsider, but by someone who had shared his office, his trust, and his long-term plans. A senior partner, threatened by an upcoming restructuring, had chosen elimination over exposure. The men in black suits had been hired quietly, efficiently, and with the confidence that no one would see them coming. No one except a child who had learned to watch. Daniel listened in silence as the final confirmation was delivered. There was no anger in him, no dramatic reaction. Only a deep, controlled resolve. Proceed, he said calmly. By the book. No shortcuts. When the room emptied, Lily looked up from her drawing. They were close to you, she said. That's why it was dangerous. Yes, Daniel replied. That's why it worked for so long. She nodded as if this confirmed something she already knew. People hurt you more easily when you let them stand close. The observation settled heavily in his chest. That's true, he said. But it's also the only way you let the right people in. That afternoon, Daniel took Lily with him to another residence, one more open, warmer, less fortified. The change was deliberate. He wanted her to see something different, something that didn't revolve around threats and controlled spaces. The house had a garden, slightly overgrown, and a large oak tree whose branches stretched wide and protective. Lily walked slowly through the grass, her fingers brushing the leaves as if testing whether the place was real. This feels different, she said. It is, Daniel replied. This is where I grew up. She turned to him, surprised. You were small here. Yes, he said with a faint smile. And scared more often than I like to admit. She considered this carefully. Then you know how it feels. I do, he said. I just forgot for a while. They sat together on the back steps as evening settled, the sky shifting through soft shades of blue and gold. Lily asked questions then, not about danger or plans, but about his childhood, his parents, the things he had loved before the world demanded strength from him. Daniel answered honestly, choosing truth over polish, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight of his past align with his present instead of pulling away from it. Later that night, as Lily prepared for bed, she paused in the doorway and looked back at him. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "Not right away." "I know," Daniel answered. "But you're ready now," she added. He met her gaze, understanding the depth behind her words. "Because of you." She didn't respond, but there was something lighter in her posture as she turned toward her room. As Daniel closed the door gently behind her, his phone buzzed with a final update. Arrests had been made. Warrants signed. The network that had threatened him was collapsing inward. For the first time since the airport, Daniel allowed himself to breathe fully. The danger was not gone, but it was exposed. And exposure, he knew, was the beginning of the end. The house settled into a new kind of quiet, one that no longer felt tense or watchful, but cautiously hopeful. Daniel noticed the shift in small ways at first, in how Lily moved through the rooms with less hesitation, how she sometimes forgot to position herself near exits, how her shoulders relaxed when she laughed. Trust was not something she offered easily, but once it began to take root, it changed the atmosphere around her. It changed him too. He adjusted his life without announcing it, canceling trips, rerouting meetings, refusing to leave the city until the investigation reached its final stage. For the first time, he did not feel trapped by these decisions. Instead, they grounded him. His advisors noticed the change but didn't question it. The man who had survived an assassination attempt had earned the right to redefine his priorities. Lily began attending a small private school under an assumed name, her safety carefully managed but not suffocating. On the first morning, she stood by the door, backpack clutched tightly, eyes searching Daniel's face for reassurance she didn't want to ask for out loud. "You'll come back," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Daniel replied immediately. "Every time." She nodded once, satisfied, and walked inside without looking back. Daniel stood there longer than necessary, watching until the door closed, feeling something unfamiliar tighten behind his ribs. Pride, perhaps. Or fear. Maybe both. That afternoon, when she returned, she talked more than he had ever heard her speak. Not about danger or people watching, but about a girl who shared her crayons, a teacher who smelled like oranges, a classroom window that let in too much sun. Daniel listened as if every word mattered, because it did. Each ordinary detail was proof that Lily was finally being allowed to be a child. That night, as they sat in the living room with the lights dimmed low, Lily suddenly asked, "Why didn't anyone protect my dad?" The question was quiet, but it cut deep. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He had learned that rushing the truth only broke it. "Because some people choose power over people," he said finally. "And sometimes the system protects the wrong things." She nodded slowly, absorbing this. "He tried to do the right thing," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. "Yes," Daniel replied. "And because of that, he raised someone who did the same." Lily looked at him then, really looked at him, and something in her expression softened. "You listen," she said. "Most adults don't." "I didn't used to," Daniel admitted. "You reminded me how." The investigation reached its public conclusion days later. Arrests were announced, charges filed, names released. The media framed Daniel as a survivor, a symbol of resilience, but he ignored the interviews and statements. His attention was elsewhere. It was on the girl sitting beside him, drawing quietly while the television murmured in the background, her presence anchoring him more effectively than any security detail ever could. When the final threat assessment declared Lily safe from immediate danger, Daniel felt relief, but it was not the kind that let him step back. It was the kind that pushed him forward. He knelt in front of her one evening, his expression serious but gentle. "Lily," he said, "I need to ask you something important." She set her pencil down and met his gaze without fear. "Okay. You don't have to stay with me," he continued. "You can choose a different life, one that's quieter, simpler. But if you want to stay, I won't just protect you. I'll be here. As long as you need. As long as you want." Silence stretched between them. Lily's eyes dropped briefly, then lifted again, clearer than before. "You stayed," she said. "Even when it was hard." "Yes." "Then I choose you," she said simply. Daniel felt his throat tighten, emotion pressing dangerously close to the surface. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment, and Lily stepped forward without hesitation, wrapping her arms around him. The hug was brief but firm, full of certainty. For the first time since the airport, Daniel understood that saving his life had been only the beginning. What Lily had truly done was teach him how to live again. The months that followed unfolded with a steadiness that felt almost unreal after everything they had survived. The world did not suddenly become safe or simple, but it became manageable, shaped by routines that grounded them both. Mornings began with quiet breakfasts, evenings ended with shared silence or stories read aloud, and between those moments life slowly stitched itself back together. Daniel discovered that stability was not built through control, but through presence, and Lily learned that safety could exist without constant vigilance. The legal process moved forward carefully and decisively. Lily's identity was restored, her father's name cleared, and the truth surrounding his death was officially acknowledged. There were no headlines grand enough to reflect the weight of that justice, but Lily felt it in small ways, in the way her shoulders no longer tightened when she heard his name spoken, in the way grief softened into memory instead of pain. Daniel stood beside her through every step, never pushing, never rushing her healing. One afternoon, they returned to the airport where everything had begun. Not through the VIP entrance, not with security forming a wall around them, but quietly, like ordinary people passing through. Lily walked beside Daniel, her hand in his, her steps confident. She paused near the spot where she had first spoken to him, her expression thoughtful. "I wasn't sure you'd listen," she said softly. "I'm glad you didn't let that stop you," Daniel replied. She nodded, satisfied, and together they moved on. Back home, the house no longer felt like a shelter or a fortress. It felt lived in. Lily's drawings covered the refrigerator, books lay open on tables, and laughter filled spaces that once echoed. Daniel found joy in things he had once dismissed as unimportant: school performances, small celebrations, quiet conversations before sleep. Each moment reinforced what he had nearly lost without ever realizing it. As the years passed, Lily grew into a confident, perceptive young woman, her awareness no longer shaped by fear but by empathy. She remained observant, but her vigilance softened into understanding rather than suspicion. Daniel watched her with a mixture of pride and gratitude, knowing that the strength she carried had not been given to her, but earned through survival and choice. One evening, as they sat together on the back porch watching the sun sink behind the trees, Lily spoke quietly. "You know, I don't think I saved you that day." Daniel turned to her, surprised. "I think you saved me first," she continued. "You just didn't know it yet." He smiled, the truth of her words settling gently between them. "Maybe we saved each other," he said. She leaned her head against his shoulder, comfortable, unguarded. In that simple gesture was everything they had built: trust, loyalty, family. The airport warning had begun as a moment of danger, sharp and terrifying, but it had ended as something far greater. It had rewritten two lives, turning fear into connection and survival into purpose. And in the quiet certainty of that evening, Daniel understood that the greatest fortune he would ever hold was not his wealth, his influence, or his power. It was the girl who had seen the truth when no one else had, and had chosen to speak.